My name is Jane Chin Davidson. I'm an art history professor here at UHCL, and I want to welcome you all to our 30th anniversary celebration, a commemoration of the dinner party here, 1980, when we were the second institution to host the dinner party ever. And to commemorate that fantastic feat of supporting feminist art in such a way, because we all know now that the dinner party is the monumental artwork of the 1970s feminist movement. And so I'm going to give up my microphone to Gretchen now so that she can introduce her reminiscence of the dinner party back in 1980.
I'm not an artist, I'm not a sculptor, I'm not an art historian, I'm a medievalist, a retired literature professor, and you will justly wonder what I'm doing here. Well, I'm the voice of the dinner party past tonight. I was one of the original faculty members at UHCL when the dinner party came. I was here. I can tell you how it was then. How many of you saw the dinner party here at UHCL in 1980? Well, welcome back. You were in the ground floor of something extraordinary. The dinner party is part of UHCL's birth story. To bring it here was an act of outrageous, artistic, and cultural daring. And that's the story I'm here to tell tonight. I will never forget what it was like to see the dinner party for the first time. The Delta building is now full of computers. 30 years ago, it contained a small theater in the round, and that's where the dinner party was installed. A mammoth triangular banquet table, 3 equal sides, each 48 feet long. There were 39 place settings on it, 13 on each side, with amazing abstract art, china-painted porcelain plates at each place, representing the 39 women who were honored guests at the table. Each plate was at once a work of art, brilliantly colored, often enigmatically shaped, and a feminist statement about the woman herself. The plates were positioned on runners, elaborately embroidered in arresting colors. I had never seen such lavish, intricate, varied embroidery before. And each runner continued and complicated the conception of the woman expressed in its plate. The plates and runners were gorgeous, but when I remember the intensity of that sensual experience of being cocooned by beauty, I realize it came not simply from them, but from the floor as well. The banquet table stood on 999 white porcelain triangular tiles, each inscribed in gold luster with the name of a woman. I could glimpse a little of this heritage floor around the outside of the banquet table, but its real impact came from the center of that huge triangle. It filled that center, shimmering like the sea in sunshine, and its richness drew the 3 parts of the great banqueting table into a whole. As I stood there, drinking in the dinner party, I was full of pride to be a faculty member of UHCL. From March 9th to June 1st, 1960, UHCL exhibited Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party. But how did we dare do such a thing? The dinner party had only been exhibited once before, the previous year at the San Francisco Museum of Art. Nearly 100,000 people lined up to see that exhibition. Some of them waited for hours to get in. Newspapers and magazines all over the country carried features on the dinner party phenomenon. By agreeing to exhibit the dinner party, UHCL had thrust itself into a national spotlight. But in 1980, this university was barely 6 years old. And here's where the quite amazing daring of UHCL comes in. A 6-year-old university is brand new. We had no financial or human resources to speak of. In 1974, when we gave our first classes, we didn't even have a building. Our library, for instance, was some shelves erected in 2 classrooms in the then tiny Arbor building. In 1975, we moved into this building, but it was only half finished. I was a literature professor, but by 1980, when the dinner party arrived, we were still seriously concerned about whether the humanities could survive here. Nevertheless, we, the tiny, upstart University of Houston Clear Lake, and primarily its Humanities and Human Sciences division, had agreed to exhibit Judy Chicago's nationally famous The Dinner Party. I came to the dinner party as a feminist, intrigued initially, but then soon seriously impressed by the intricacy, subtlety, and elaborateness of its feminist imagery. That heritage floor I was describing incarnates a feminist statement about how tenuous women's hold on her place in history is. Like the gold names on the 999 tiles, women appear and disappear in history, depending on who's looking and under what circumstances and from what point of view. Moreover, the heritage floor makes a feminist statement about foremothers. It's the underpinning for the banquet table. The 39 honored guests could not have been the women they were without those other 999 women and their lives. We owe who we are in part to our sisters and to the women who've gone before us. The dinner party is a brilliant intertwining of seeing, responding, and understanding. The most arresting feature of the dinner party, and the feature that made it notorious, and you'll be seeing this developing in the exhibit tonight, is the imagery shaped, carved, and painted into the ceramic plates. Clitorises, vulvas, vaginas, eggs, and breasts. As plate after plate opens its dark core, Chicago's female sexual imagery is unmistakable. Many viewers found the sexual imagery of the plates so shocking they were repelled by the exhibition. Pornography, they called it, and left in a huff. Male genitals have had a long honored place in art. Poeticized and idealized for centuries. Think about the Greek male nude statues, where the penises seem to be resting demurely in beds of curling leaves. But there's no indication whatsoever of genitalia on female Greek nudes. Judy Chicago's plates are the female artist's revenge for centuries of neglect. They really are. Each carved and painted plate evokes the accomplishments of one of the 39 outstanding women at the banquet table. Mythological figures, figures from ancient history, medieval and early modern thinkers, sufferers, rulers, writers, and artists, as well as more recent figures. Emily Dickinson, the great American poet. Anne Hutchinson, driven out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony for her religious convictions and preaching. Sojourner Truth, the black feminist abolitionist who renamed herself after surviving slavery. Susan B. Anthony, who fought for the vote for women. Ethel Smythe, composer and musician, who became a suffragist when her work as an artist was ignored. Margaret Sanger, who fought against the laws prohibiting the dissemination of information about contraception. Virginia Woolf, one of the greatest novelists of the early 20th century, and on, 39 in all, each with her own plate. The embroidered runners the plates sit on are nearly equally striking and full of complex feminist imagery. The runner for Sappho, the great Greek lyric poet, for instance, depicts a Doric temple And her name, as Judy Chicago writes in her book about the plates, quote, rests within a burst of color that stands for the last burst of unimpeded female creativity. China painting and embroidery are women's overlooked and unappreciated traditional art forms. While men were creating vast canvases, women were painting plates and embroidering linen. And so Judy Chicago composed her great sculpture of painted ceramic plates and elaborately embroidered runners. Giving dinner parties itself is another of women's overlooked and unappreciated traditional art forms. Chicago first thought, humorously, about the dinner party as woman's version of Da Vinci's Last Supper, reinterpreted, quote, from the point of view of those who've done the cooking throughout history. Her 13 guests on each side of her equilateral banquet table would match Christ and the 12 apostles. But a more direct set of associations fits much better with China painting and stitchery. Giving dinner parties, like painting plates and embroidering everything embroiderable in their houses, had been a primary opportunity for creativity for middle and upper class women for centuries. Unlike so much of life, the dinner party was securely in woman's sphere. When the dinner party opened at UHCL in March 1980, I recognized immediately what was motivating Chicago. This work was fueled by rage. Personally, I knew all too well where that rage came from. Judy Chicago and I are the same age. We were raised during the same 1950s white picket fence era when the ideal woman was to find her fulfillment bringing up 3 to 5 children in the suburbs and keeping a decorously arranged, beautifully appointed home for a hubby to come back to after his day at the office. On weekends, she would give dinner parties. She would invite other suburban families to elaborate gourmet meals where they would admire her French recipes, neat children, and gracious living room before driving away in their station wagons, and all would be well. If you did not have the good fortune to be married to a man who could support you and the family in the suburbs, you could be a teacher, an office worker, or a nurse. Other professions were effectively closed to you. Women were axiomatically second to men, supportive, loving, adorning, but not accomplishing, helping him succeed, but never charting our own courses or putting ourselves first. If a family had both a boy and a girl, as a matter of course, the boy was given the chance for higher education. Passivity, subservience, dutifulness, willingness to repress all her own needs for self-expression unless they coincided with the needs of her family, these were the traits of the ideal woman in the 1950s. And depression was her characteristic illness. Gradually, as the 60s played out, women began to understand the forces that were limiting their lives so stringently. And the more aware they became, the more they rejected being crushed into the mold of the ideal 50s woman. By 1980, when the dinner party arrived at UHCL, feminism was still new, and it frightened many Americans, conjuring up mobs of bra burners who would wreck the status quo, destroy family life, push religious teachings aside, and corrupt the middle class. Nevertheless, the 60s had moved the attack against the ideal woman of the 50s from the fringes of public discourse to its center, and the more clearly women saw what their society expected them to be and do, the angrier they became. This was the powder keg that Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party ignited in San Francisco in 1979. Here at the brand new University of Houston Clear Lake, potential faculty were being interviewed with questions that are illegal to ask today. I remember Chancellor Alfred R. Newman, the elegant gentleman who founded this university. This library is named after him, inquiring, "But Mrs. Miskowski, tell us how old your children are." They were 2.5 and 5.5. "And tell us, what do you do with your children when you're teaching?" I also remember a faculty meeting in the second year of the university in 1976, 4 years before the dinner party arrived. We were debating inclusive language, whether to use he and she in official university publications, or just he. The faculty voted overwhelmingly in favor of just he. We look back on these times now and laugh and feel superior. We've come a long way indeed. But this was the South 30 years ago. And while the new idea that women were capable of functioning in all areas of life was gaining ground even here, the old notion that she should stay at home and look after the children was far stronger. The dinner party was powered by rage against the neglect and suppression of women's creativity and the relegation of women to the second sex. But why should this West Coast work of art find itself in the theater of a 6-year-old university in the South? After all the hullabaloo at the San Francisco Museum of Art and the 100,000 people who'd stood in line to see the dinner party there, why wasn't it opening in a major museum? Judy Chicago writes that museum after museum all over the country declined to exhibit the dinner party, and that includes all the major Houston institutions. Were China painting and embroidery, women's traditional art forms, too lowbrow for museums, too kitsch? Or was it the feminism, with the strident tone and the in-your-face sexual imagery too far out of line for the middle of the 1970s? For whatever reason, the museum doors were firmly shut against the dinner party, and Chicago describes herself as having been, quote, devastated by the art institutional rejection. Nevertheless, it was still not obvious that Judy Chicago would be willing to bring her huge piece to a brand new university's theater in the round. In the end, one man, virtually single-handedly, made possible its exhibition here. Calvin Cannon, the university's founding dean of human sciences and humanities. The dinner party was the last of a series of art triumphs for Cal. In the 6 years the university had been in existence, he'd negotiated 3 groundbreaking cultural events for the campus. The American premiere of German composer Karl-Heinz Stockhausen's Sirius, a monumental water wheel constructed by the now famous conceptual artist Mel Chin, and the premiere of a play by world-renowned director and playwright Robert Wilson. Then, so the story goes, Dr. Cannon asked Chancellor Newman whether the chancellor would be interested in sponsoring a dinner party. The dinner party, Cal's greatest triumph, cost him his position as dean, and cost us, the faculty, one of the most imaginative and creative deans we were ever to have. Dr. Newman, chancellor and founder of the university, had chosen Cal to help him bring this new university into being. Dr. Newman was basically conservative. He used to enjoy saying that no one with a chip on his shoulder would be hired to teach at his university, which of course should have meant no one who wanted to teach women's studies or black studies or Mexican American studies. Remember, this is 30 years ago. Cal Cannon, on the other hand, hired as radical a faculty as he could get past Dr. Newman. Cal, dapper and exuberant, delighted in new ideas, and was tireless in his efforts to make this new university work. Cannon and Newman seemed to balance each other, maximizing the university's possibilities. The best of 60s radicalism joining forces with sensible, effective European conservatism transplanted to the South. Nevertheless, in mid-January, before the dinner party had even opened its doors, Dean Calvin Cannon, who was in the process of bringing this event here and was the primary person in charge of overseeing its stay, was demoted by Chancellor Newman from dean to, quote, director of special university events. Newman had not only agreed to having the dinner party here, he had high hopes for it. He told the student newspaper, quote, "The dinner party will do for our university what football does for other schools. It will put us on the map." And Newman was right. That's just what it did. Then why did Newman reassign Cal? In all probability, Cal's reassignment was Newman's response to pressures from other university stakeholders. Science and business were very important to this new university. Stockhausen, Robert Wilson, Mel Chin, and Judy Chicago might suit the School of Human Sciences and Humanities, but the rest of UHCL may well have resented and feared Cannon's increasing predominance. The dinner party then, taking over a campus building for 3 months, would have come as the last straw. Whatever the reason, Chancellor Newman fired Calvin Cannon as dean. The dinner party drew more people to UHCL than have ever attended any event here before or since. Although 36,000 people saw it, altogether 36,000 people saw it, people from all over the South and the West. Its coming was a major occurrence for the Houston arts community, and they greeted it with great excitement and supported it personally and financially. The quite stupendous leap of imagination to envision the dinner party at UHCL was Dr. Calvin Cannon's, and the largest credit for its coming belongs to him. It must have taken all his charm and savoir-faire to convince Judy Chicago and her advisors that the UHCL Theater in the Round could take the place of a museum gallery. For Dr. Cannon, the dinner party was a momentous achievement indeed. By now, radical women's art is undebatedly one of the important developments of 20th and 21st century art, and the dinner party has become a feminist icon. Housed permanently in its own splendid gallery in the Elizabeth A. Sackler Center for Feminist Art at the Brooklyn Museum, its stature is secure as one of radical women's art's first triumphs. As the second venue that dared show the dinner party, the University of Houston won a place of honor in the history of both feminist art and feminism. Setting the table, the exhibition opening this evening has a special role to play in that history. Judy Chicago's book about the dinner party discusses UHCL's important role, but she is virtually alone in remembering us. Article after article and art history book after art history book recounting the dinner party story ignores us altogether. It's as if we've been written out of the history of this important work. But we did something very difficult and very daring, and we deserve to be celebrated for it. Setting the table is our gesture toward writing ourselves back into this history. The exhibition catalog, which I'm holding here, will go to libraries all over the country. When art historians research the dinner party in years to come, they will find the Setting the Table catalog and realize that UHCL, in its infancy, dared to exhibit Judy Chicago's great work. We will have reclaimed our place in the history of the dinner party. Thank you.